I didn't think a neighbor's complaint could cut off my access to the pool and gym by the next billing cycle. But that was a question humming in my head as I opened my mailbox and felt the dry August heat radiate off the pavement. The notice inside wasn't loud or dramatic. It was clinical, formatted, and cold. The kind of paper that pretends to be routine while quietly threatening your daily life. I had installed rain barrels months earlier, a small nod to conservation that blended into the landscaping. And now I was being told they were a problem big enough to lock me out of shared spaces. The warning didn't accuse me of anything dramatic. It referenced limits, measurements, and an alleged excess that someone nearby had flagged. It hinted at escalating steps, the kind that begin with letters and end with access denials, fines, or worse. As I stood there, cicadas buzzing faintly in the trees, I realized how quickly normalcy could tilt into an HOA nightmare if the right person decided to push. I want to be clear from the start, this is a fictionalized account told from my point of view about how small power gets abused when rules are treated like weapons. It's about how precision can beat intimidation, and how paper trails matter more than raised voices. It's also about patience, because nothing in these communities moves fast unless someone wants it to. The hook wasn't the barrels themselves. It was the idea that a neighbor's complaint, delivered without context or courtesy, could trigger a chain reaction that the association claimed was automatic. The letter suggested timelines that felt aggressive, consequences that felt preloaded, and an assumption of guilt that I hadn't earned. I folded the paper, listened to a sprinkler click off nearby, and decided to start from the beginning rather than react to the end. The background matters, because this place sells itself on calm. The Enclave is modern, gated, and meticulously landscaped, with clean lines and neutral colors that make everything look orderly even when it isn't. The board prides itself on efficiency. They send polished emails, publish agendas on time, and remind everyone that rules exist to protect property values. On paper, it all sounds reasonable. I moved in for that predictability. I followed guidelines, read the covenants, and asked questions before making changes. When I installed the rain barrels, I checked the sections on exterior modifications and water collection. The limits were there, buried in an appendix most people never read, and they included exceptions tied to barrel size, placement, and visibility. Appendix D was dry, technical, and specific, which suited me fine. The neighbor who complained wasn't a mystery. I had seen the way she walked the sidewalks in the evenings, phone in hand, pausing to photograph anything that looked out of alignment. She wasn't loud, but she was persistent. Her power came from repetition, from knowing that if she sent enough messages, someone on the committee would eventually forward one with a note that said, "Please advise." The sound of her heels clicking at dusk had become part of the neighborhood's rhythm. The association's process encourages this. Complaints are anonymous to the recipient, but patterns emerge. A single issue gets reframed as community concern. The first letter is always labeled friendly reminder, even when it cites consequences. Mine referenced an August 21st notice date, a compliance window, and a review of amenity privileges tied to the next billing cycle. The phrasing was careful, and that care made it feel sharper. I didn't panic. I paused. The air conditioner hummed inside as I laid the letter on the counter and pulled up the governing documents. The rules weren't short, but they were finite. If I was going to respond, it would be with citations, not emotion. That decision, made early, shaped everything that followed. Conflict rarely starts with shouting. It starts with assumptions. The assumption here was that my barrels exceeded allowed capacity. The letter didn't say who measured them or how. It simply stated an allegation and a path forward. I walked outside, the late afternoon light glinting off the lids, and counted. There were fewer barrels than the maximum allowed under the standard provision. The exception language, though, was where things got interesting. Appendix D allowed additional capacity if barrels met certain criteria: uniform height, placement behind screening, and non-commercial use. Mine did. I had receipts, installation photos, and an email from months earlier where a committee member acknowledged the setup as compliant. That email wasn't labeled approval, but it was acknowledgement, and acknowledgement matters. This was the first evidence prop that would anchor my response. a dated email thread from spring, time-stamped and archived. I printed it, highlighted the relevant lines, and placed it next to the August 21st notice. The contrast between calm acknowledgement and sudden urgency told a story on its own. Outside, a breeze rustled the hedges, and I felt the familiar shift from unease to focus. I sent a measured reply. I referenced the specific sections, attached photos with measurements, and asked for clarification on the alleged excess. I did not accuse anyone. I did not speculate. I asked for the data. That question alone slowed things down because data requires someone to admit how they got it. If the committee treated the complaint as gospel, the next step wasn't a conversation. It was a deadline with teeth, and deadlines are where access gets taken away. The reply came back polite and vague. They thanked me for my diligence and said they would review. Review is a word that buys time for one side and costs it for the other. The letter's timeline, however, didn't pause just because I asked a question. The clock kept ticking toward the next billing cycle, toward the moment when key cards stop working and explanations come later. I marked the dates on a calendar. I reread the appendix. I measured again, this time with a level and a tape documenting everything. The sound of the tape, snapping back, felt decisive. I wasn't going to argue about feelings. I was going to present facts, so clean they'd have to confront them. This was where the story naturally paused, on the edge of escalation. The background was set, the hook was in, and the conflict had teeth. The next move wouldn't be mine alone, and that uncertainty hung in the air like the low hum of the gate motor cycling as someone else drove through. The review period stretched longer than the polite tone suggested, and that's where pressure quietly builds. Days passed without a substantive answer, and each morning the same automated reminder appeared in my inbox, restating the August 21st notice and the compliance window, as if no correspondence existed in between. The light blinking on my phone at dawn became a ritual, a reminder that silence from the committee didn't pause their internal machinery. By the time the 10th day rolled around, the association escalated without resolving my questions. A second letter arrived, this one labeled preliminary enforcement. It cited the original allegation, reiterated the potential for amenity suspension, and introduced a new phrase, failure to cure. The language was still calm, but it now carried weight. Somewhere between the hedges and the gatehouse, the narrative had shifted from inquiry to assumption. I requested the measurement report. That's all. Not a defense, not a threat, just the report. The response took 48 hours and arrived as a summary paragraph rather than a document. It claimed visual estimation by a contracted inspector, with measurements deemed unnecessary due to apparent excess. Apparent is a dangerous word when privileges are on the line. I could hear lawn equipment whining faintly outside as I read it twice, then a third time. The second evidence prop entered the story here. A board agenda excerpt posted online for the upcoming monthly meeting. Item 7 referenced water storage compliance review, plural. That meant I wasn't alone, or it meant they were grouping cases to streamline enforcement. Either way, it meant decisions were about to be made in a room I wouldn't be in. I submitted a formal request to be placed on the agenda. The rules allowed for homeowner comment, limited to 3 minutes, with materials submitted in advance. I assembled a packet. It included the appendix language, the earlier email acknowledgement, timestamp photos with measurements, and a simple table showing total capacity versus allowed limits, with exceptions applied. I avoided adjectives. I avoided conclusions. I let numbers do the work. The reply granting agenda placement arrived with a caveat. The enforcement timeline would proceed regardless of discussion. That sentence told me everything about how power was being exercised. Process existed, but outcome was presumed. The air inside my office felt stale as the afternoon wore on, and I realized this wasn't about barrels anymore. It was about demonstrating control. When deadlines harden before facts are heard, the real risk isn't a fine. It's the quiet loss of access that makes daily life smaller. The meeting came and went without my attendance. I watched the recording later, noting how item 7 moved quickly, bundled with others, framed as routine. The summary didn't mention my packet. It mentioned visual excess and community standards. The next morning, a notice appeared on my account portal indicating pending amenity review. Pending is another word that sounds neutral until you live with it. Escalation thrives on ambiguity. I could still enter the gate, but my gym access flickered, working one day and not the next. The pool key failed entirely over the weekend. When I inquired, the response pointed back to enforcement review. No dates, no specifics, just a loop that fed itself. This is where frustration tempts rash moves. Instead, I added a third evidence prop, a final notice dated May 12th from a previous year, issued to another homeowner and later rescinded for measurement errors. It was public record, buried in archived minutes. The pattern was clear. Visual estimation led to overreach, corrected only when challenged with precision. I compiled a follow-up letter. It referenced the May 12th notice, the rescission, and the risk of inconsistent enforcement. I asked again for documented measurements. I reminded them, gently, of the appendix's exception language. Outside, rain finally fell, drumming softly on the roof, filling the barrels in question. Each drop a quiet rebuttal. Money hadn't entered the picture yet, but when access is threatened, fines are never far behind. The response shifted tone. It acknowledged receipt of additional materials and stated that enforcement would be paused pending review of Appendix D. That single sentence was the first crack. The clock didn't stop officially, but it slowed. My access stabilized. The gym card worked again. The pool gate clicked open with a familiar beep, and I exhaled without realizing I'd been holding my breath. A complaint led to assumptions. Assumptions led to enforcement, and enforcement threatened access. Precision, documentation, and patience forced a pause where none was intended. The pause wasn't a victory, it was an opening. Section 5 of this story begins here, with the realization that waiting wasn't enough. I requested a formal compliance audit under the association's own procedures, a step rarely taken because it requires actual measurement and written findings. The rules allowed it, but they didn't advertise it. If the audit confirmed compliance, the question wouldn't be about barrels anymore. It would be about why escalation happened at all. The request landed days before the end of the month, right where billing cycles and enforcement intersect. The timing mattered. It forced the committee to choose between pushing forward blindly or acknowledging process. The choice they made would shape what came next, and that choice hung unresolved as this chapter closed. The sound of evening traffic beyond the gates a steady reminder that time, for once, was on my side. The audit request changed the temperature immediately. It didn't come with accusations or threats, just a citation to the association's own compliance procedure and a polite expectation of timelines. When rules are turned back on the people who enforce them, responses become careful. Emails slowed. Language softened. The committee stopped using words like apparent and started using words like documented. The inspector arrived midweek, clipboard in hand, early morning sun reflecting off the barrel lids. This time, there was no visual estimation. Heights were measured, diameters recorded, placement verified against the screening requirements. I watched quietly from a distance, the faint whir of a leaf blower somewhere down the street underscoring how ordinary the moment felt compared to the stress it carried. Ordinary moments are often where power gets checked. The written findings took 5 days. They confirmed compliance under Appendix D, citing uniform height, approved placement, and total capacity within the exception limits. The report was dry, factual, and unambiguous. That dryness was its strength. There was no room left for interpretation. Compliance wasn't just confirmed. It exposed how close I'd come to losing access over nothing. Retaliation, in this story, wasn't loud or dramatic. It was procedural. I submitted a follow-up requesting correction of my account status and restoration confirmation of all amenities. I attached the audit. I also requested a note be added to my file reflecting the findings, a small step that prevents quiet re-escalation later. The association complied. Access flags were removed. A brief acknowledgement arrived, thanking me for my cooperation. Cooperation is an interesting word when you're the one who followed the rules from the start. Still, the outcome mattered more than the phrasing. What followed surprised me. A revised policy memo went out to all homeowners clarifying rain barrel limits and measurement procedures. It referenced Appendix D explicitly and stated that visual estimation alone would no longer trigger enforcement. That was the real reversal. It meant my case had rippled outward, quietly correcting a flawed practice. Social dynamics shift fast when a single complaint turns into a documented overreach. The climax wasn't a confrontation. It was the moment I realized the neighbors' complaints stopped. The evening walks continued, but the phone stayed down. There were no more photos, no more emails routed through the committee. The power she wielded had depended on ambiguity, and ambiguity was gone. This was a satisfying revenge story, not because someone lost, but because the system corrected itself under pressure. The abuse of power theme resolved not with punishment, but with boundaries reasserted. The barrels stayed. The rules stayed too, clarified and constrained. I kept copies of everything. The August 21st notice, the audit report, the policy memo. Paper trails are quiet armor. The rain came again that month, filling the barrels legally, audibly. Each splash a reminder that precision can be louder than complaints. Aftermath is about cost. I spent time, energy, and patience navigating a process designed to favor assumptions. The association spent credibility, forced to acknowledge a misstep without admitting fault. The community gained clarity. That balance felt fair, even if it wasn't perfect. Living here feels calmer now, not because rules vanished, but because they're clearer. I still read every notice. I still document changes. The hum of the gate at night sounds the same, but my reaction to it has changed. I know where the lines are, and I know how to defend them without crossing any myself.